Good evening, my dear friends. The situation at the front by the end of the 29th of June. At the end, we will have an interesting news background. We will start with Volchansk. Today, there were reports of a high intensity of hostilities just in the area of Gagarin Street, which we said before. That there is a lot of activity now, and the enemy is trying to break through to the south. And at the same time there were shots of the presence of the armed forces of Ukraine, which indicates attacks and counterattacks by the defense forces as a whole. By the end of the day, there are reports that there are now battles for this area. This is exactly what we said before, that they are pulling up reserves and now they have entered the battle. We do not record any visual changes, at least what there are, except 4 reports of high intensity of hostilities. The enemy aims to break through to the south of Gagarin Street and then turn east in the direction of the Volchansky aggregate plant. It was also reported about the battles in the Lipovsky direction near Gluboko, without significant changes so far. The Ponsklimansky section of the front without significant changes. In the Kremen direction, there is a further plus from the side of Azov. Information has been received today from domestic OSINTers that the Azov fighters managed to further advance through the Kremen forest, Serebryansky forestry, and knock out more from a number of positions. For the most part, Russian troops have gained a foothold within the gray zone, reducing it to a minimum. And again, from several positions knocked out. I forgot one moment. They asked me on the previous broadcast to confirm the presence of the APU, where the yellow zone was added. This is exactly what we will apply to Azov, because they also asked for Serebryansk forestry, and I subsequently showed it. And here the patterns are specifically shots from Russian drones of the presence of the defense forces. Therefore, everything is done on the basis of SINT analysis. There are no fictions here, as you know they draw something positive. No, these are your shots. It is clear that there were questions from the Russian side, so we decided on this moment. We have a similar situation, and, I repeat, in the Kremen forest, Azov managed to dislodge Russian troops and occupy a section up to 3 to 35 kilometers wide and to a depth of 950 meters. The preliminary situation looks like this. Well, the Russian troops made room for a number of positions. Not only did they gain a foothold on the limits of the gray zone, but they also reduced the red one. There are active hostilities. We have already talked with you 3 airs ago about the fact that there may actually be a little more gray zone south of Kuzminov. Because there were shots published where the APU is attacking Russian positions, but the situation remains under clarification in this area. And in general, we state that quite high activity is now observed in the Kremen direction from the APU. In my Telegram, I published before this video a video of the attack of the defense forces of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade, with the support of a T-64 BV tank of the 22nd model on the Russian advanced positions, which are northwest of Dybrov. This is just about this area. In other words, we can state that in the Kremen direction, the initiative is now gradually passing to the APU, because it is possible to push it. In general, if we take the entire Kremen direction, that is, this is eastern Ternov, southeastern from Yampilovka, already in the area of Diprov. Apparently those attacks that are confirmed by the Droma footage, and, accordingly, the Serebryansky forest. Active hostilities in the area continue. Naturally, conditions are being set for the Russian side now. Again, where to use the necessary reserves or strengthen positions in the Kremen forest. Most likely this will happen. They will send for reinforcement, or try to use the neighboring Lymansk direction, that we have turns. Yampilovka, to increase pressure in this area, just where they started, in the direction of Nevsky. Relative stabilization is most likely to be observed. But again there were reports, as you remember, that Western weapons would be provided to Azov, and, accordingly, their effectiveness in attacks would increase. This also needs to be understood. Therefore, we will look, as they say, Now we state that they are able to move forward in the general direction. Not only am I calling, I repeat, a number of other brigades are also attacking and successfully advancing on Kremen. We turn with you to the Yarklok. Footage was published where the enemy conducts assault operations along Oleg Koshevoy Street, only just in the same neighborhood. The remaining few multi-story buildings and footage from the defense forces were published attacks on one of the positions in the house of Russian troops. This is exactly the same house. Part of it goes into the red zone, and I must say that activity, and in general, we have been commenting a lot on the Canal microdistrict in recent days. We see that the enemy's activity has increased in this direction, although there was some positivity in relation to it before. But nevertheless the enemy was pulling up forces, as we also talked about, concentrated in the microdistrict itself. And now he's under pressure. It presses, including on the Orlov tract. The fighting is very, very heavy in our direction. We are moving with you to the Kurakhovsky direction right away. I said on the previous broadcast that we would comment on it in more detail in the evening. After my broadcast, there were messages, including on Georgiivka, so for the evening, there is a more objective picture of the situation in the Kurakhovsky direction. The first one is Krasnogorovka. Unfortunately, there is a minus in it. Footage of fighters in the forest was published, where they attacked the positions of Russian troops in a building along Pushkin Street, and along the second position of Nekrasev Street with drone drops. Therefore, the enemy's advance has been added in a section up to 450 meters wide, to a depth of up to 200 meters. Well, it is clear that there was a small ledge here, and it is clear that they will put pressure on it. So this is already a moment for themselves. Naturally, they are also not going to leave anything without a fight, so the fights are going on for each house in fact. And for the Russian troops, believe me, it's also not an easy run along the same Krasnogorovka. Every house is given to them by effort. In other words, there is no such thing that any breakthrough, as we said, will be a creeping slow offensive along the entire front. And now we see this, including in Krasnogorovka itself. Therefore, it is a minus for Krasnogorovka. And there were comments on Georgiivka, that on Georgiivka there was an attack by a motorized rifle unit, supported by several armored vehicles. It is reported that they reached the center again. The equipment managed to be knocked out, destroyed. Comments from one of the fighters that with the infantry, it remains to be clarified, but previously retreated to their original positions, as it was supposed to advance further. Therefore, the battles for Georgiivka continue. If we talk about what was published visually, then visually everything was within the red zone, but this is movement. But we are talking about one of the attacks. There were only a few of them in the locality. Therefore, we continue active military operations for Georgiivka. Including south of Georgiivka and north of Victory, there is also activity of Russian troops. We sometimes omit these moments, but in fact, and so you understand that a huge number will enter along the front. And there are a lot of frames, but let's just say, to broadcast for an hour, it won't be quite right to analyze every moment. Because for the most part the situation remains unchanged. Either without significant changes or when more significant, we are talking about it. Therefore, the pressure actually remains high on the part of the enemy. He is trying to improve his tactical positions in several directions, including, I repeat, not only Georgiivka itself, and south of it to the north of Victory. Active hostilities continue. We move on with you further. Then we have Konstantinovka, the South Donetsk direction. Russian troops launched an attack on Konstantinovka itself with the support of armored vehicles. We have already said with you that it is clear, it is obvious that after the advance of the northern beam of Solenenko, of course, they go to two forest belts that lead to Konstantinovka itself. They will definitely make attempts to advance. According to the footage that was published, it was possible to knock out and destroy 3 armored vehicles. What was left with the infantry? Whether they retreated to their original positions, it is unknown, but most likely yes. Because it was assumed that it would be possible to break through, well, it's not easy to move along the open forest belt. but it will be possible to break into the building itself. Therefore, most likely they retreated to their original positions, but in any case, we are now adding a gray zone to this area. And we can state that the enemy is launching attacks on Konstantinovka. There may be such a situation, as we had in Novomikhailovka. That is, the fighting went on for 6 months for the settlement, for the village of Novomikhailovka. A similar situation may be for Konstantinovka, but it all depends on a number of other points. Because Novomikhailovka had its own peculiarities, Konstantinovka has its own. What are your own? First of all, do not forget that the enemy presses from victory. Yes, it manages to be stopped, but its drones and in heavy drones with Maviki drops, they are regularly in this area. Therefore, logistics has become a little worse. It is also necessary to understand this. According to Novomikhailovka, it was possible, as you remember, to hold a very large territory to the north, but nevertheless, that is. And now it keeps north of Poroskovika a huge section of the gray zone. Therefore, as it will be with Konstantinovka, whether they will be able to hold a long defense like this, time will tell. Now we state that the enemy is pressing. At the same time do not forget that the forces are now involved. The situation is different than from Novomikhailovka. The forces involved are much larger than they were before. It presses not only on Konstantinovka itself, and not only along the Solinenko beam in the northwest direction. In the same direction, he presses in the area of the small rate, and the direction we have on the beam is Caviar. Already the Ugledar direction, so he has very large forces concentrated, and it is natural that he maneuvers them, redirects them. Plus, RAP systems have been added not only from our side, but also from their side. The plus involved is widely used. How does this differ from Novomikhailovka? I mean, there are much more motorcycles for attacks. And to all this, there are also those very turtle tanks, the Sultan shed them. Therefore, the situation is different, the enemy is pressing now. We managed to repel this attack, but I always make important remarks that we are analyzing a specific case. Because not all the information is always there. As you can see, the situation remains very complicated.